They say when you die, your whole life flashes before your eyes. Commander Jace Oren had stopped believing that the moment he realized his whole life had already been flashing before his eyes for the past 11 years, not at death's door, but on perfectly ordinary Tuesday mornings, while eating cold ration packs, while sitting in the dark of a damaged transport hold listening to artillery rounds make the hull sing. He'd seen the Vethka before they arrived. He'd seen the fall of Meridian Station, 6 weeks before the first carrier dropped out of fold space above it. He'd sketched the configuration of their command vessel, the trilobite silhouette, the 6 forward vanes that deployed like fingers opening, on the back of a decommission form because there was no proper paper nearby, and his superior at the time had laughed and asked him what kind of alien monster he was drawing, and he hadn't had a good answer. That superior was dead now. Most of them were. The Vethka had arrived in force 14 months ago, emerging from 6 simultaneous fold points in a coordinated display that the military analysts had called a logistical impossibility and an event requiring years of prepositioning. That was what the analysts said. What Jace had said, in a cargo bay near Vega Station with a corporal named Miri T and a case of replicated whiskey and nothing else to do, was, "They've been watching us for a long time. They know every bottleneck. They know every supply route. They came in through every door at once because they had the time to study which doors we use." Miri had asked him how he knew that. He'd told her he'd seen it. She hadn't pressed him on it. She was that kind of person, practical, unflappable, the type who would accept an unusual answer if refusing to accept it wouldn't change anything. She was also dead now. 15 months ago, Corridor 3 of Vega Station, when the Vethka boarding parties came through the docking cradles, and Miri had held a junction point for 9 minutes with a plasma cutter, and a barricade made of loading equipment while 40 civilians got to the escape pods. 9 minutes. Jace still dreamed about that sometimes. Not the death, he hadn't seen that one coming, or he had and had simply refused to examine it too closely, which was a failure he carried around like a stone in his shoe. He was sitting in the back of a military ground car on care of III when Admiral Cho's aide found him. The planet was technically occupied. Vethka garrison to the north, human resistance cells scattered through the equatorial city belt, a ceasefire agreement that everyone on both sides understood was a polite fiction maintained by mutual exhaustion. Jace had been here 3 weeks. He lived in a rented room above a distillery that no longer distilled anything, which meant it smelled of fermentation and emptiness in equal measure. And he had spent those 3 weeks sitting in the back of various vehicles and in various doorways, watching. He had a wall in his room. He'd found paint somewhere gray-green, left behind by whoever had owned the space before, and he'd covered one wall in diagrams. Not maps, not tactical outlines, something more personal, threads connecting moments. Images from his visions arranged not chronologically but structurally, because his visions didn't work chronologically. They arrived in fragments. A face before he knew the name. A sound, the particular harmonic that Vethka command beacons made when they were preparing to jump, before he knew what the sound signified. An outcome before he understood the sequence that produced it. The aide's name was Lieutenant Seo, Jun 24 years old, very clean uniform, an expression that suggested she'd been told to find Commander Jace Oren and had imagined someone more impressive. She climbed into the ground car's back seat, looked at him, unshaven, civilian jacket, eyes that had the particular flatness of someone who hadn't slept well in some time, and said, "Admiral Cho sends his regards." "The Admiral can keep them," Jace said. "What does he need?" "He needs your particular insight into Vethka fleet positioning. We have a window, 6 hours." "I know about the window." She looked at him with the specific expression people wore when he said things like that. He was used to it by now. Some people found it unsettling. Others found it useful. The useful reaction was the one that kept him alive. We also, Seo-jun said carefully, have a complication. The complication was a Vethka princess. Her formal designation, translated from the formal Vethka honorific register, by the ship's linguistics system, with appropriate caveats about cultural equivalence, was something like emissary daughter of ascendancy. The analysts had defaulted to calling her Princess Vale, because emissary daughter of ascendancy exceeded the character limit on tactical display labels. She had been captured 4 days ago during an intelligence raid on a Vethka communication hub. She had not been the target of the raid. She had been present apparently by accident, or what looked like accident, though nothing the Vethka did was ever purely accidental. She was 3 meters tall, bioluminescent striping along her dorsal ridges, 4 upper limbs folded in the resting configuration that the xenobiologists described as neutral compound eyes that caught light in 12 different frequencies, and an expression insofar as a Vethka face could hold an expression of serene, absolute contempt. She was being held in secure Bay 7 aboard the cruiser IHS Tenacity, in a containment cell designed for large combatants, and according to the report Jace read in the ground car on the way to the docking pad, she had spent the 4 days of her captivity refusing to speak, standing perfectly still in the center of the cell, and watching the humans who monitored her with what the duty officers variously described as assessment, calculation, and profound disinterest. The tactical value was obvious. A member of the Vethka Ascendancy caste would have real-time access to fleet disposition data, command frequencies, and strategic timetables. If she could be made to talk, through negotiation, through the particular human art of finding what someone valued and offering or threatening it, the window the Admiral had mentioned might expand from 6 hours to something more actionable. The problem was that no one had gotten her to say a word. The second problem, which the report mentioned in careful language near the end, was that they weren't sure she needed to say a word. The Vethka had knowledge bonding protocols, organic transmission of tactical data between Ascendancy caste individuals. It was possible she was communicating right now without saying anything, in frequencies the monitoring systems couldn't detect, to fleet elements they didn't know were positioned nearby. The third problem was Jace's. He'd been reading the report and a vision had come, not summoned, never summoned. They arrived like someone had changed the channel, and what he'd seen was the Bay 7, a specific angle on the containment field. An outcome he couldn't quite read clearly yet, obscured the way some visions were, like looking at something through smoked glass, but present enough to tell him that the next several hours were going to be among the most important of his life. He'd stopped reading the report and looked out the ground car window at the gray sky of Karov III, and felt the familiar thing he always felt at moments like this, which was not excitement and not dread but something in between. The sense that the future was already there, solid and complete, waiting for him to reach it. He hated that feeling. He also, lately, had started to wonder if it was wrong. They took him to the observation deck above Bay 7. Admiral Cho was already there, a compact man in his 60s, close-cropped gray hair, the permanent posture of someone who had learned at a young age that looking authoritative in meetings was a form of armor. 4 officers flanked him, and through the reinforced transparencies below, visible in the blue-white wash of the containment field, stood Princess Vale. "Commander," Cho said without turning. "Admiral, I won't ask how your leave of absence has been. I need you looking at that." He nodded toward the bay. Jace looked. The princess was exactly as described, tall, luminous still. But there was something in her posture that the reports had missed, or that the observers hadn't had the vocabulary to name. She wasn't simply standing still. She was standing still in the way that an apex predator stood still, not resting, not passive, but in complete conservation of energy, waiting with the patience of something that had never needed to hurry. The 12-frequency compound eyes swept the bay once, twice, and then, Jace became aware of this over a period of about 3 seconds. They settled on the observation deck. On him. "She's been doing that," one of the officers said. "Every few minutes, checking the observation positions." "She's not checking the positions," Jace said. "She's tracking personnel changes." "How do you? How long has she been looking at that deck specifically?" A pause. "Since you arrived, sir." Jace filed that away. "What do you need from me?" he asked Cho. "Whatever you can give me. You read Vethka movement before Meridian, before the Vega incursion. Something about the way they position assets." Cho finally turned and looked at him directly. He had the eyes of someone who'd stopped believing in luck approximately 40 years ago and had been operating on calculation ever since. "I don't care how you do it. I need to know if those 6 hours are real or if we're being set up." "You think she's bait?" "I think a member of the Ascendancy caste doesn't get captured accidentally." Jace looked down at the bay again. Vale was still watching the observation deck, still perfectly still. "I want to talk to her," he said. "The linguists have tried." "I know I want to try differently." He paused. "I need you to clear the bay, everyone out, just me and her." The silence from the assembled officers had a very specific texture. The kind that means everyone in the room is processing the same risk assessment simultaneously and arriving at the same conclusion, which is that this is a bad idea, paired with the separate conclusion that no one has a better one. "She's restrained?" Jace asked. "Containment field, Class 6. She can't get through it without triggering shutdown protocols that would depressurize the bay." "Good. It would also depressurize you." "I know." He said it simply, without drama, the way a person said it when they'd already weighed a thing and decided. "Give me the bay." The containment field was a soft blue curtain of ionized atmosphere. On his side, Jace could feel its edges, a slight pressure change, the air tasting faintly metallic. He stood 3 meters back from it and looked at Princess Vale, and Princess Vale looked at him. Up close, she was different from the reports. The reports had described her bioluminescence as decorative, or possibly communicative in a social register. Standing in the bay with her, Jace could see that the light moved with her breathing. Subtle rhythmic shift in the striping along her dorsal ridges, blue to violet to something in the near ultraviolet that he couldn't quite perceive, but that prickled at something behind his eyes. She breathed. She was, he reminded himself, a living creature with lungs and blood and something analogous to a nervous system, and she was as far from home as he was. He said in standard, "You know I'm not a linguist." "Nothing. I'm not an interrogator either. I'm not whatever you're used to." He sat down on the floor, not for any tactical reason, just because he'd been on his feet for 16 hours and his knees were making their displeasure known, and sitting also made him smaller, less threatening, which seemed relevant. "I'm a man who sees things sometimes before they happen. I don't know why. It started when I was 8 years old, watching my mother die in an accident I'd seen 3 weeks before it happened and hadn't been able to stop." The light along Vale's ridges shifted, a flicker very fast. "I know you understand me," Jace said. "The Vethka have had translators running for longer than we've been a spacefaring species. You've been listening to us for longer than we knew you existed." A pause, then in perfectly unaccented standard she said, "The human who sees ahead." Her voice was a chord, multiple harmonics simultaneously, which shouldn't have been possible with a single larynx, except Vethka anatomy wasn't operating by the same rules. It created the impression that several entities were speaking at once, all in agreement. "That's one way to put it," Jace said. "We have observed your visions. In 37 instances over 11 years, your tactical predictions proved accurate to high-precision outcomes. We considered 3 explanations." She paused, and the pause had the quality of something deliberate. She knew how to use silence the way humans used emphasis. The most concerning explanation proved correct. "Which was?" That you have genuine temporal sight, partial, fragmented, but real. Jace felt the prickling behind his eyes again, the metallic taste of the air. Why does that concern you? Because, Vale said, we do not know what you see. It came out slowly. Not reluctantly. Vale wasn't reluctant, that wasn't the right word for it. She was precise. She chose what to reveal the way an engineer chose which load-bearing element to expose during an inspection, giving you enough to understand the structure without giving you enough to know where to push. The Vethka understood fate in a specific way, not mystically, not religiously, structurally. They had spent 11,000 years developing what they called predictive convergence, a systematic understanding of how civilizational development followed deterministic paths. Every species they had encountered in 400 years of expansion had followed the same paths: development, expansion, conflict with established powers, absorption or elimination, depending on factors the Vethka had learned to measure precisely. Humans had not followed the path. She didn't say it as a compliment. She said it as a problem. A man of science describing an experiment that had returned anomalous data, not pleased, but intrigued in the particular way that intriguing things were also threatening. Your species' development curve, she said, diverges from the model at several points. The model predicts that civilizations reaching your technological stage will have unified governance within 2 centuries of first contact pressure. Your species fragmented further. We're stubborn, Jace said. Factionally inconsistent, she said, which might have been agreement. The model predicts that civilizations responding to resource scarcity will rationalize conflict through ideology. Your species manufactured ideological conflict in the absence of scarcity. We're creative, he said. Unpredictable, she said. The model predicts that civilizations facing existential-level adversaries will centralize command structures. Your species has decentralized. Harder to cut the head off, Jace said, if there's no single head. Vale was quiet for a long moment. The light along her ridges ran a slow pattern, blue to violet, violet back to blue. You understand the strategic logic of your own chaos, she said. Some of us do. You specifically. Me sometimes, he said. I see pieces, not everything. I see what I see and I work with it. What do you see now? He didn't answer immediately. He was, in fact, seeing something now, had been seeing it since he sat down on the floor of Bay 7, the fragmented impression accumulating the way his visions did, assembling from the peripheral to the central. He saw the bay. He saw the containment field. He saw a specific configuration of events that hadn't happened yet but were close, hours away at most, maybe less. He saw the bay breached. Not from her side, from his. Tell me about the garrison, he said, the northern one on this planet. Vale's ridges went very still. You've seen something, she said. Tell me about the garrison. Why would I tell you anything of military value? Because, Jay said carefully, what I'm seeing involves this bay. And what happens in this bay in the next few hours affects you as much as it affects me. A long pause. The air in the bay hummed with the containment field's rotation cycle. Somewhere in the ship above him, Jace could feel the low vibration of the drives warming, which he hadn't noticed before. The garrison is not merely a garrison, Vale said finally. It is a coordination nexus. The fold relay embedded in the garrison's deep infrastructure allows precise fleet positioning across a 6-light-year radius. Without the relay, the fleet operates with a 12-hour coordination delay. Jace absorbed that, and the window, he said, the 6 hours, is not a weakness in our positioning, she said. It is an invitation. There it was. The confirmation of what Cho had suspected, and Jace had begun to feel the shape of. A gap that wasn't a gap. A window engineered to look like an accident, designed to draw human assets into a specific configuration that could be closed around them like a fist. "You're telling me this?" Jace said. "Yes." "Why?" The bioluminescence ran a pattern he hadn't seen before. Longer waves, slower, something he didn't have vocabulary for yet. "Because," Vale said, "I have spent 4 days in this bay watching the humans who monitor me. I have watched 31 different personnel in rotation. I have seen their fatigue, their fear, their small acts of consideration for each other. I watched your Lieutenant Seo Jun bring coffee to the duty officer who had been awake for 14 hours, unbidden, without being asked." A pause. "I watched a maintenance technician sing quietly to himself while checking the field emitters. He did not know he was being observed. He sang anyway." Jace didn't say anything. "We model civilizations," Vale said. "We have modeled 612 sapient species over 4,000 years. We have models for hunger and fear and tribalism and altruism and all the vectors of behavior that determine outcomes. Your species fits none of them cleanly." Another pause. "I have been here 4 days, and I have seen a maintenance technician singing to himself in an empty corridor because he felt like singing. This is not in any model." Jace looked at her for a long time. "What's the relay's frequency?" he asked. "I will not give you that." "What will you give me?" "I will give you what I have given you. What happens next is yours to determine." The compound eyes caught the light, 12 frequencies, 12 angles of perception, looking at him with something he couldn't name. "You see pieces," she said. "Work with them." He came out of the bay running. Not literally, he came out walking fast, which in a military environment translated to the same urgency without the performance. Seo Jun fell into step beside him before he'd made it 10 meters. "Well," she asked. "The window's a trap. They have a fold relay in the garrison they haven't disclosed in any of the intelligence. The 6-hour window is designed to pull our assault assets into a kill corridor." She didn't stop walking. Her face went through approximately 4 calculations in 2 seconds. "You're certain?" "She told me." "A beat, why would she tell you?" "I'll explain later. Where's Cho?" "Flag Bridge." "Get me there. And I need navigation, specifically whoever's been running the fold entry probability matrices for the assault window." "That's Lieutenant Commander Park." "Get Park too. And whoever we have who knows Vethka relay architecture, not theory. I need someone who's actually worked with captured hardware." Seo Jun was already on her comm. She had the particular quality that the best staff officers had, which was that she processed information without needing it explained and executed without needing it justified. She'd ask her questions later, after the crisis, and she'd probably ask them very precisely. They made the Flag Bridge in 4 minutes. Cho was there with 3 senior officers, all of them clustered around a tactical display showing the proposed assault vectors against the northern garrison. The display looked clean, professional, convincing. It also looked, Jace thought, exactly like what someone who wanted to draw you into a kill corridor would design. "Tell me what you have," Cho said without preamble. Jace told him. He laid it out flat, without qualifiers, without hedging, the way he'd learned to do because hedging wasted time and time was the only resource that was genuinely non-renewable. The relay, the coordination delay without it, the 6-hour window as an engineered trap, the fleet assets that were almost certainly positioned at fold entry points keyed to the human assault timeline. Cho listened with his hands clasped behind his back, face neutral, eyes sharp. "Source?" he asked when Jace finished. "The princess." Another specific silence. The kind that meant everyone was running the same question. Why would she tell him? And Jace didn't have a complete answer for it yet. Or rather, he had an answer that would sound unlikely. "I believe it," he said, before anyone could voice the question. "And I believe it because she didn't have to tell me anything. She had no leverage to gain. We already had her. She's been sitting in that bay for 4 days and she chose now to talk. She chose what she gave me. She's not stupid, she knows I'll use it. Then why give it? One of the officers asked. Jace thought about a maintenance technician singing in an empty corridor. Because she's decided we're interesting, he said. I know that sounds thin, it's the best I've got. Cho looked at him for a long moment. Then, what do you need? What he needed was 12 hours and a different plan. What he got was 11. The fold relay was the key. If it could be disrupted, not destroyed, which would trigger an automatic fleet response, but disrupted, knocked out of alignment in a way that looked like equipment failure. The coordination delay would give them room to move. Room to change the shape of the engagement so it didn't fit the parameters of the trap being laid for them. The problem was that disrupting a Vethka fold relay from outside, the garrison required very specific equipment and very specific knowledge, and they had partial access to both. They had a captured relay component, recovered from the Vega station incursion, partial, damaged, but enough for the base's systems engineer, Chief Warrant Officer de la Reyes, to have spent 8 months reverse engineering. Reyes was 42, perpetually covered in what appeared to be conductive polymer compound, and had opinions about Vethka engineering that swung wildly between profound respect and deep personal offense. Can you do it? Jace asked her, in the engineering bay where she'd established what she called her workspace, and which everyone else called the organized catastrophe. Reyes looked at the specification he'd written out from memory. The relay parameters Vale had given him, the structural information, the frequency range. She read it twice. Then she looked up. Who gave you this? Does it matter? It matters to me because whoever gave you this either built one of these things or spent significant time studying one up close. And either way, I want to have a conversation with them. Later, Jay said, can you do it? She looked at the specifications again. She picked up a tool from her bench, a calibration instrument of some kind, and turned it over in her hands. 7 hours, she said. Maybe 6 if Park helps me with the transmission matrices. You have 5. She looked at him. Of course I do, she said, with the resignation of someone who had learned that time estimates in crisis situations were always aspirational. She put the calibration instrument down and started clearing the bench. Go away so I can work. He went back to the bay. Vale was standing where she'd been standing, center of the cell, perfectly still, light shifting along her ridges. She watched him come through the door. The relay information was accurate, she said, before he reached the field boundary. It wasn't a question. Working on verifying it now, he said. You trust me? I'm working on verifying it, he said again, which was a different answer. He sat back down on the floor. His knees were still complaining. The floor was cold and slightly gritty. Why did you do it, truly? The light ran its slow pattern. I told you what I had to tell you. About your models, about the maintenance technician, that's not a complete answer. No, she agreed, it is not. He waited. He'd learned to wait for things, which was possibly the most useful skill his visions had ever given him. Not the seeing, but the patience that came from knowing that the moment you were waiting for was real and was coming. I am Ascendancy caste, Vale said. I have access to 1,200 years of documented expansion records. I have read every record we have of first contact, every observation, every model output. A pause. Every species we have encountered truly, not merely observed at distance, has asked us one question upon learning of our expansion history. The question is always, what did you do with the worlds you took? What do you tell them? We tell them the truth. We assimilate what is useful. We archive what is not. We maintain populations in managed environments when elimination would waste resources. Jace didn't say anything. Every species has asked us that question, Vale said. Your species has not. He looked at her. We haven't asked what you do with conquered worlds. In 14 months of contact, in 67 documented interrogations of captured Vethka personnel, in 19 diplomatic communications during ceasefire negotiations, not once has your species asked what we intend for the worlds we take. Another pause. Every species asks. It is the first or second question always. Yours has not asked. We do not understand why. Jace sat with that for a moment. I think, he said slowly, we already know the answer. And we decided we didn't like it, and we're going to address it directly rather than by asking. The light ran the long, slow pattern again. You have decided, she said, to not accept the predetermined outcome. Something like that. Based on what capacity? Your military resources are significantly inferior to ours. Your production capacity is outpaced by our logistics. You have no strategic depth sufficient to sustain. I know, Jace said. I know all of that. We know all of that. He looked at his hands, calloused, a long-healed burn scar across the back of his left, the residue of 11 years of understanding consequences and doing things anyway. We're doing it anyway. Why? Because, he said, and this was the thing, the specific thing that he'd been turning over for 11 years. The alternative is worse. Vale was quiet for a long time. The containment field hummed. The drives in the ship above vibrated through the floor. You know you might lose, she said. Yes. You know that what I told you may not be enough, that the relay disruption may not work, that the fleet elements I am not permitted to disclose may still close the window. Yes. And you are doing it anyway. Yes. Another long silence. I need to know, she said, and her voice had changed. Some harmonic dropped out of it, making it less choral, more singular, that if it works, if your operation succeeds, what happens to the garrison population? Jace looked at her. Prisoners of war, he said, standard protocols. Define standard. Medical care, nutritional requirements, access to environmental maintenance for species-specific needs, no coercive interrogation, no reprisals against non-combatants. He paused. We have the rules. We don't always follow them, but we have them, and when we break them, we call it a violation. We don't call it policy. Vale was silent for so long that Jace thought she wasn't going to say anything. Then she said, the relay's harmonic signature will be off by 0.03 degrees from your engineer's current specifications. She will need to correct for it. Jace stood up. His knees complained, then subsided. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me. A pause. Tell your maintenance technician that his singing carries through the ship's ventilation. He was halfway to the door when she spoke again. Commander. He stopped. You said you saw pieces, she said. What you see now, is it good or bad? He stood there for a moment. The vision he'd been carrying, fragmented, smoked glass, assembling itself over the past several hours into something more legible. The bay, the containment field, an outcome. I can't tell yet, he said honestly. It's still coming together. But it is there. It's there. Then go, she said. Work with your pieces. He ran. Literally this time. Down the corridor from Bay 7 to the nearest comm station, where he got Rays on the line and read her the corrected harmonic specification, which she absorbed with a silence that he'd learned, meant she was already recalculating. Where did you get this? She asked. Same source as before. The source is being very helpful for a prisoner. 0.03 degrees, Jace said. Can you do it? I've been doing it, Rays said. I noticed the drift an hour ago and was about to call you. This confirms it. A pause, the particular pause of an engineer who has just had external confirmation of something they'd been quietly worried about. Still 5 hours. 4.5. Of course, she said again, already moving away from the comm. Jace found Cho on the flag bridge. He laid out the corrected parameters. He laid out the updated plan, not the window the Vethka had created, but a modified insertion that used the relay disruption to create a different window, one that hadn't been designed for them, one whose timing would confuse the fleet elements waiting to spring the trap, because the trap was built around assumptions that would no longer be valid. It was, he explained, like a clairvoyant cheating at cards. You didn't win by knowing what hand you'd been dealt. You won by using that knowledge to change the game entirely. Cho listened. The senior officers listened. Park, who had apparently been doing her own analysis on the fold entry matrices and had found something she couldn't explain, which Jace's revised plan happened to explain neatly, listened, and then immediately started running recalculations on her tablet, which was the most enthusiastic response he was going to get from her. I need authorization to brief the assault element commanders on the modified insertion timeline, Cho said, half to himself, half to the room. I need the relay disruption confirmed operable before I move anything. He looked at Jace. 6 hours was the original window. You're telling me we move in 4. 4.5. To use a window that didn't exist until an hour ago. The window exists, Jace said. It just wasn't in the plan before. Cho looked at him for a long time. The look of a man doing the risk calculation, the confidence assessment, the evaluation of every piece of intelligence he'd received in the past 12 hours and whether it cohered. How sure are you? He asked. Jace thought about smoked glass, about things becoming legible. Sure enough, he said. Cho nodded once sharply. Do it. 4 hours and 20 minutes later, Ray's disruption package hit the garrison's fold relay. Jace was in the observation bay when it happened, not by any particular plan, but because his legs had carried him there between briefings. He was looking at the tactical feed, the garrison's emission signature, the fold relay's frequency output, when the relay went out of phase. Not dramatically, not in a way that looked like attack. A subtle drift, 0.03 degrees and then some, accumulating over minutes into a cascade failure that looked, to any monitoring system, like hardware fatigue. The Vethka fleet elements waiting at the fold entry points began to recalibrate. The recalibration took time. Time was the gap. The human assault element went through it. What followed was not clean. Nothing was ever clean. There were 14 casualties in the first wave insertion. The garrison's defensive batteries were better calibrated than the intelligence had suggested, and there was a 20-minute period during which the outcome could have gone several ways, during which Jace sat in the observation bay watching the tactical feed and feeling the vision resolve, smoked glass clearing, piece by piece. And the thing he kept coming back to was not the tactical situation, but the question Vale had asked him. Is it good or bad? He hadn't answered her honestly. He'd said he couldn't tell yet. The honest answer was, it was both. That was the nature of the things he saw. They were never cleanly good or cleanly bad. They were outcomes. And outcomes were the sum of everything that went into them, including the human cost and the alien cost, and the specific texture of the moment. When a maintenance technician stopped singing, because the alert klaxon had started and picked up a weapon instead. The garrison fell in 6 hours and 11 minutes. The fold relay damaged, not destroyed. Ray's had been very precise about that, was secured intact. The fleet elements withdrew when the relay went offline. The kill corridor they'd built was empty by the time the Vethka command structure figured out what had happened. Cho found him in the observation bay after it was over. 22 casualties, Cho said. Garrison secured. Relay intact. He stood next to Jace and looked at the feed. Not a clean win. No. Better than the alternative. Yes. You should eat something. Jace looked at him. Admirals' prerogative, Cho said, with something that might have been humor if he'd let it all the way through. You've been running on coffee and whatever that is you do for 14 hours. Go eat. Debrief tomorrow." He left. Jace stayed a few minutes more. He was looking at the feed, but he wasn't really seeing it. He was seeing something else, the next fragment, arriving now in the aftermath. The way some visions came more clearly in the quiet after an event than in the middle of it. He saw Bay 7 again. He saw the containment field. He saw a conversation he hadn't had yet. He got up and went back. Vale knew before he reached the field boundary. "It worked," she said. "Yes." "The relay is intact." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. The light ran its long pattern. Casualties. 22. "On our side," she said. It was not a question. She knew the garrison complement. She knew what the assault would have cost. "I don't have those numbers yet," Jace said. "You will not be told those numbers," she said. "Your military command will consider it information that could undermine morale or provide intelligence on your assault effectiveness." "Probably," he said. "I don't love that. But you accept it. For now." She seemed to consider this. "You won a battle," she said. "You have not won the campaign. The fleet elements will return. The relay disruption has bought you weeks, perhaps a month of reduced coordination. You remain tactically inferior. Your production capacity." "I know," Jace said. "You said all of that already. I wanted to confirm your understanding." "I understand perfectly." He sat down on the floor again. The floor was still cold. "I'm not under any illusions about what we're in. And still you fight. And still we fight." She was quiet for a long time. In the silence, the containment field hummed its rotation cycle, and somewhere in the ship above, very faint through the ventilation, something that might have been a radio somewhere playing music. "I have a request," Vale said. "Tell me." "My captivity. I understand the military logic. I have significant intelligence value. I also understand that I told your command structure information that compromised Vethka operational planning, and that this will need to be evaluated when I am eventually repatriated." She paused. "I am making no argument for my own release. I have information value, and I used some of it, and I accept the current situation." "But," he said. "I would like to speak with your maintenance technician," she said. "The one who sings." Jace looked at her for a long moment. "His name's Corvin," he said. "He's from a planet called Ithessa. He told me he sings when he's nervous because his mother used to sing to him when he was afraid of the dark and it stuck." The light ran its longest pattern, all the way from blue through the violet into the near ultraviolet. "He is afraid," Vale said slowly. "We all are," Jace said. "We're all afraid, we just keep going." She was quiet for so long that he thought the conversation was over. Then she said, "I would like to add this species to our models, your species specifically." A pause. "The models do not account for a civilization that knows it might lose and continues anyway, not from miscalculation of the odds but from deliberate choice. We do not have a category for this." "We have a word for it," Jace said. "What word?" He thought about Miri T and 9 minutes and 40 people in escape pods. He thought about Corvin singing to an empty corridor. He thought about a man with clairvoyance who kept trying to change the things he saw, even when he wasn't sure they could be changed. "Stubbornness," he said, "or courage, they're pretty close to the same thing when you're losing." Vale looked at him with 12 frequencies of light and 4,000 years of civilizational models behind her eyes. "Add it to the category," she said. "It is the one your species has produced that we cannot predict." He came out of the bay and found Seo Jun waiting for him. She had 2 cups of coffee, real coffee, or as close to it as the ship's fabricators managed, and she handed him one without being asked. "Admiral wants a full debrief in the morning," she said. "I'll be there." "Also," she hesitated, "the senior staff has been asking about the princess, what she told you and why." What you told her. She looked at him with the direct, undemonstrative eyes of someone who asked questions when she needed answers and didn't when she didn't. Admiral Cho is not asking officially yet. He will. I know. What will you tell him? Jace looked at the door of Bay 7. He looked at the corridor ahead. He looked at the coffee in his hands, which was hot and bitter and extremely good. The truth, he said, that she made a choice, that she decided something was worth deciding. He started walking. We're going to have to get better at recognizing when they do that. Seo Jun fell into step beside him. Is that a vision? She asked. It's a guess, he said. Some things are still just guesses. Fair enough. They walked. The ship hummed around them, drives, environmental systems, the low constant murmur of a vessel keeping hundreds of people alive in space. Somewhere in the ventilation, very faint, Corvin was singing again. Jace listened. The vision was still there, the next fragment, the one that had come to him in the observation bay. It was clearer now. A long corridor, a table, two figures across from each other, not a cell, not a containment field. A room with a window showing stars. He didn't know whose stars yet. But the conversation happening between those two figures, the one assembling itself at the edge of his perception, had the particular texture of something important. Something that didn't end a war but changed its shape. Something that put a new category in a civilizational model that had never needed one before. He was almost sure it was good. He was working with the pieces. He kept walking. The debrief took 3 hours. Cho ran it methodically, the way he ran everything sequentially, without theater, asking each question only once and recording the answers in the mental ledger of a man who had learned to separate what he believed from what he could verify. Jace gave him everything. The relay information, the corrected harmonic, the conversation about civilizational models. When he got to the part about the maintenance technician singing in the corridor, 3 of the 4 senior officers shifted in their seats, with the micro-expressions of people trying to determine whether a man they'd been ordered to trust was experiencing some kind of delusional break. Cho did not shift. She made a decision, Cho said. Yes. Based on behavioral observation of our crew. Over 4 days of uninterrupted observation, yes. She's been watching us the entire time. Every rotation, every shift change, every small human behavior that the monitoring team didn't think she was tracking because they assumed she was being passive. Jace paused. She was never passive. She may still be running an operation, said Commodore Yi, the most senior of the officers and the one who spoke the least, which in Jace's experience meant she was the one thinking most carefully. The relay information could have been accurate as a setup for something larger. We give her access to the technician. She's in contact with fleet elements. She's gathering data on our systems. That's possible, Jace said. I'd also point out that she had access to the monitoring system's acoustic range the entire time she's been in the bay. She's been listening to the ship for 4 days. If she's gathering technical data, she's already gathered what she can gather from passive observation. He looked at Yi directly. She chose to tell me about the relay. She could have chosen not to, and we'd have walked into the corridor and lost significant assets. She chose to give us a real operation rather than nothing. That's a decision with consequences for her. For a reason we don't understand, Yi said. For a reason I think I understand, Jace said. Which is that she decided we were worth something she hasn't decided other species were worth. I don't know exactly what she calls it. I know what we call it. Which is? He thought about the conversation, the models, the category that didn't exist, the maintenance technician's song carried through the ventilation. Consideration, he said. She considered us. The room was quiet. What does she want in return? Cho asked. To understand us. Not the tactical picture, she has the tactical picture. She's had the tactical picture for months. She wants to understand why we do the things we do, The things that don't fit any model. Jace folded his hands on the table. I think she's going to write a new report. I think when she goes back, and she'll go back eventually, that's not in question, she's going to present something to her ascendancy that they haven't had before. A case for negotiation? Yi asked, with a careful neutrality that suggested she'd already considered the possibility. I don't know, Jace said honestly. I see pieces. The piece I can see is that whatever she reports is going to matter. The outcome isn't clear yet. Cho closed the folder in front of him, physical folder, old habit. He'd been keeping paper records since before some of these officers were born. He looked around the room. He looked at Jace. I'm going to authorize continued contact with the prisoner, he said. Supervised, monitored, recorded. I want Seo Jun in the room or adjacent. He paused. I'm also going to authorize Corvin to speak with her if he wants to. Voluntary. He's not an intelligence asset, he's a maintenance technician, and I'm not going to order him into a situation he doesn't understand. Jace nodded. One more thing, Cho said. Your visions, the next fragment you mentioned, the room with stars, how clear? Getting clearer. Timeline. Days. Maybe a week. Whose room? I still can't tell, Jace said, but it doesn't feel like hours. Cho absorbed that. You're saying you're seeing a meeting that takes place on a Vethka vessel. I'm saying I'm seeing a room with stars and two figures talking. The stars might be significant. The room's architecture feels different, tall. The proportions are off from human standard. Another silence. The kind where everyone in the room was processing what it meant that their tactical intelligence asset was describing visions of locations that hadn't been accessed yet. Get some sleep, Cho said. Before anything else, get some food and sleep. The relay data needs 48 hours of technical analysis before we can exploit it properly, and you're going to be in those rooms too. You need to be functional. Jace got up. When you see the room more clearly, Cho said, not quite a question, you'll tell me. Yes, Jace said, you'll be one of the people in it. He left before Cho could respond to that. He slept for 11 hours. He dreamed, not of the future, the visions came when they came and didn't take requests, but of old things. His mother's hands on a steering wheel, the smell of rain on a road in the dark. A child who had known what was coming and had been unable to stop it, and had spent the next 3 decades developing the stubborn belief that unable to stop it was not the same as had to accept it. He woke clear-headed for the first time in days. Corvin was in the corridor outside the engineering bay when Jace found him. 27 years old, broad-shouldered, the patient competence of someone who'd grown up working with his hands and considered machines to be fundamentally reasonable entities that rewarded careful attention. He had a toolkit over one shoulder and was reading something on a datapad, and he looked up when Jace approached with the expression of someone who is unsure whether they're about to be congratulated or assigned additional duties. You're Corvin, Jace said. Yes, sir. You were doing maintenance on the Bay 7 field emitters. Yes, sir. Standard 12-hour rotation. The emitters on Class 6 containment need recalibration every. He stopped. Is there a problem with the emitters? No. The emitters are fine. Jace paused. Do you know who's in Bay 7? Corvin's expression shifted to the careful neutrality of someone who knows about something officially classified and is determining the appropriate thing to say. I've heard. I haven't seen her directly. The field panels are on the exterior. She's heard you, Jace said. She wanted me to tell you that your singing carries through the ventilation. Corvin stared at him. She asked, Jace said carefully, if you would be willing to speak with her. I'm telling you this is completely voluntary. You're not required to. You're not being asked as part of an intelligence operation. You're being asked as a person, because she's been listening to you for 4 days through a ventilation shaft, and she has questions that have nothing to do with military information. Corvin was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his toolkit. He looked at the datapad. He looked at Jace. "What kind of questions?" he asked. "I don't know," Jace said. "I think she's curious. I think she's trying to understand something, and she's decided you might be part of the answer." "Me specifically." "You specifically." Corvin thought about it. The thinking was visible, not anxious, just thorough, the way a careful person approached something unusual. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Sure, yeah, I'll talk to her." Jace looked at him. "She's a prisoner, right?" Corvin said. "She's a long way from home. She's been in a box for 4 days. He shrugged, not dismissively but with the practicality of someone who has reduced the situation to its most essential elements. "I can talk to her." "She's also," Jay started. "I know what she is," Corvin said simply. "I work on the containment emitters. I've read the classification docs. She's Ascendancy caste. She's potentially the highest-ranking Vethka we've ever held. She's got intelligence value that I'm not cleared to know the specifics of, and she could probably figure out how to kill me 12 different ways before the field could trigger shutdown." He picked up his toolkit. "She's also been locked in a room for 4 days, and I have nothing else to do this afternoon." "Where's the bay?" Jay stood in the observation deck, above Bay 7, and watched. Corvin stood at the field boundary with his hands in his jacket pockets. The jacket was old, gray-blue, a civilian piece he'd kept through 2 reassignments because it was comfortable, and looked up at Vale with the particular non-theatrical directness of someone who had not been trained in diplomatic protocol, and therefore had no diplomatic protocol to fall back on. He said, "I hear you wanted to talk to me." Vale looked down at him. The light ran its patterns. "You are the one who sings." "Yeah," Corvin said. Was that annoying? I didn't know it carried that far." "It was not annoying." "Okay," a pause. "My name's Corvin. I do maintenance on the field emitters. The ones keeping you in there, actually, which is a little weird now that I say it out loud." "Corvin," Vale said, "this is the name your parents gave you." "My mother, she named me after it's a bird, back on Ithessa. Big black birds, they're noisy, they make this sound in the morning that's basically impossible to sleep through." He paused. "She thought it was funny. I've made my peace with it." The bioluminescence ran a long, slow wave. Jace had learned to read those a little. Not fluently, but enough to know this one wasn't displeasure. "Why do you sing?" she asked. "Force of habit, mostly," Corvin said. "My mom used to sing when she was working. Didn't matter what she was doing, cooking, fixing things, whatever. Just songs. Old ones she'd learned from her parents. I picked it up," a pause. "It helps when I'm nervous, which is most of the time lately because—" He gestured vaguely upward, which encompassed the ship, the war, the general situation. "You are afraid," Vale said. "Consistently," he said, "but the job still needs doing so." "This is the choice," she said slowly, as if confirming something. "You are afraid and you continue." "Pretty much. Every human I have observed makes this choice. The choice to continue despite fear." She was quiet for a moment. "In Vethka culture, fear is a signal that directs action. When we are afraid, we retreat, we regroup, we eliminate the source of fear before proceeding. Fear and action do not coexist comfortably." Corvin said. He seemed to be thinking about this with genuine interest rather than strategic calculation, which was probably why Vale had asked for him specifically. "So what do you do when you can't eliminate the source? When it's just, the situation is what it is and you're afraid, and there's nothing you can do about the thing making you afraid?" A long pause. "We have frameworks," Vale said carefully, "for certainty about outcomes. When outcomes are uncertain, we seek to reduce uncertainty before acting. We do not act into uncertainty comfortably." "We don't either," Corvin said. "We just do it anyway." He paused. "I don't know if that's brave or just how we're wired. I genuinely can't tell sometimes." "In 11,000 years of model development," Vale said, We have not encountered a species that routinely acts into unresolved uncertainty as a primary behavioral mode. Corvin scratched the back of his head. I mean, we're also the species that invented competitive eating contests and insurance fraud and a sport where you purposely fall off a board into water. We're not always making great decisions. Vale was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What is competitive eating?" And Corvin started to explain, and from the observation deck above, Jace watched the bioluminescence along Vale's ridges run a pattern he had never seen before: rapid, asymmetric, the light flickering in short bursts that the xenobiologists would spend 3 weeks trying to categorize and would eventually classify, tentatively, as the Vethka equivalent of laughter. The vision sharpened over the next 4 days. Jace kept his wall. He'd found gray-green paint here too, different shade, slightly more gray but workable, and the wall of his quarters on the Tenacity had its own diagram. Not the same as the one he'd built over months on Karov III, tighter, more focused, the threads connecting specific moments rather than broad patterns. The room with stars was coming clear. He'd been right about the proportions: tall ceiling, structural elements that spoke to a species accustomed to different gravity, ambient light sources positioned for 12-frequency vision rather than human standard photoreception. He'd been right about 2 figures at a table. He'd been right that Cho would be one of them. He kept looking at the second figure and finding it both clear and somehow resistant to articulation. The way some visions were, not smoked glass, exactly, but present in a way that seemed to bend around direct observation, as if the significance of the moment was too weighted to fully render. On the 4th day, he went back to Bay 7. Vale watched him cross the bay with the attentiveness she brought to everything. "You have been seeing more," she said. "Yes. The fragment you mentioned, the room with stars. Getting clearer." She was quiet. Then, "A Vethka command vessel has windows that show stars. Human vessels do not, typically. Human observation ports are small, functional. Vethka ascendancy vessels have large observation chambers by design. Status is signified by proximity to the void." Jace looked at her. "I'm not telling you about fleet positioning," she said. "I'm telling you about the architecture of the room you're seeing, so you understand what you're looking at when it comes clearer." He absorbed that. "You've already seen this." "I have considered possible futures," she said carefully. "I am not clairvoyant, I extrapolate. It is not the same as what you do." "What future did you extrapolate?" She was quiet for a long moment. "There is a function in our expansion protocols," she said, "for encounters that do not resolve cleanly. Elimination, absorption, or," she paused, "or a third category, one that we have used only twice in 4,000 years. It requires that an encountered civilization demonstrate a specific quality." "What quality?" "Novelty," she said. "Genuine, demonstrable novelty. Not in technology, we have encountered species with technological advantages. Not in military effectiveness, there are species we found difficult to eliminate but eliminated nonetheless. Novelty in fundamental approach, a way of being that does not fit the model. A quality that might, over time, produce outcomes that cannot be predicted and therefore cannot be prepared for." She looked at him with 12 frequencies of light. "Your species has consistently demonstrated this quality, for 14 months, under conditions designed to eliminate it." He was very still. "The third category," he said. "Communication," she said. "Formal, structured. A recognition that elimination would cost us something we cannot predict and therefore cannot replace." A pause. "The decision is not mine to make. It would require ascendancy review. It would require that I present evidence. Evidence of the quality. Evidence that your species possesses what I believe you possess." "Which is why you've been watching," Jace said. 4 days in a cell. You've been building your case." "I have been building my case for 14 months," she said. I was in the communication hub voluntarily when your intelligence team raided it. I did not arrange to be captured, but I did not prevent it." He stared at her. "You were looking for evidence up close," he said. "You couldn't get it from observation alone." "The singing through the ventilation was not something I expected," she said. "It was precisely the kind of thing I came to find." Jace sat down on the floor. The vision was fully clear now. It had come into complete resolution while she was talking, the way some visions did, waiting for the right piece of information to click the last fragment into place. The room with stars, the tall ceiling, Cho at the table. The second figure was Vale. Not in restraints, not in a containment field. Sitting across a table from an admiral of the human fleet, in an observation chamber on a Vethka vessel, with stars visible through a window that ran from floor to ceiling. It wasn't a surrender. It wasn't a negotiation for terms of occupation. It was something he didn't have clean language for, a first meeting between two parties who had been at war for 14 months, and were sitting down not because the war was over, but because they'd both decided it was worth having a conversation before it went any further. "You're going to request repatriation," he said, "on specific terms." "Yes." "And you're going to present to your ascendancy." "Yes." "And whatever they decide," he stopped. "I can't see past the meeting. I see the meeting clearly. What happens after is still." "Still pieces," she said. "Still pieces." She was quiet. The containment field hummed. The drives vibrated through the floor. "If they decide against the third category," she said, "the war continues, and I will be returned to active ascendancy function, and I will be your adversary again." "I know. You are not afraid of this." "I'm always afraid," Jace said. "I'm doing it anyway." The bioluminescence ran its longest pattern. Blue to violet, violet into the near-ultraviolet, out the other side into something he couldn't perceive but could feel as a shift in the air between them. "Corvin asked me," she said, "what Vethka music sounds like." "What did you tell him?" "I demonstrated," she said. "The humming, we do not call it music, we call it resonance sharing, but the function is similar." "He heard you." "He said," she paused, "he said it reminded him of something he couldn't name, a feeling of largeness. He said it made him want to call his mother." She looked at Jace. "He called his mother. I heard him through the ventilation. He was telling her he was fine." Jace let out a breath. He hadn't entirely been aware he was holding. "He is not fine," Vale said. "None of you are fine. You are in the middle of a war you may not win, operating at the limit of your material capacity, sustaining casualties that your models tell you are unsustainable." She looked at him with the full weight of 12-frequency compound eyes and 4,000 years of civilizational knowledge behind them. "And he called his mother to tell her he was fine, so she would not worry." "Yes," Jace said. "We have no category for this either," she said. "We call it love," he said. "When you do things to protect people from pain, even when it costs you something." The light ran its pattern. "Your species," Vale said slowly, "produces feelings we have not modeled. We have documented this. We do not understand the mechanism." "Neither do we," Jace said. "And yet you proceed." "And yet we proceed." He got up from the floor one more time. His knees had stopped complaining. He'd been sitting on cold metal floors enough in the past week that they'd apparently made peace with it. "I'm going to tell Admiral Cho what I've seen," he said. "The full vision, the room, you, the meeting." "I expected this," she said. "He'll want to prepare. He'll want to know what the meeting is and what's at stake." "Yes." "He'll also want to know if it's a trap." "It is not a trap," she said. "I am telling you this as directly as I am able to tell you anything. The meeting I am proposing, through channels that I will activate when I am repatriated, is not a trap. It is the third category. It is as close to a flag of intent as my civilization produces." Jace looked at her for a long moment. "He's going to ask me if I believe you," he said. "And I'm going to tell him yes," he said, "based on a maintenance technician's singing and a conversation about competitive eating. I'm going to tell the Admiral of the fleet that I believe a Vethka princess based on that." The light ran its pattern, the asymmetric flickering, the one the xenobiologists would spend 3 weeks classifying. "He will think you have lost your judgment," she said. "Probably," Jace said. "He'll listen anyway, he always listens." He walked to the bay door. He stopped. "When you go back," he said, "and you present your case, what do you need?" "I need to describe your species accurately," she said. "I need language for things that are outside our existing vocabulary. I need the ascendancy to understand what they are deciding about when they decide. And the singing helps with that." "The singing," she said, "is the clearest example I have found of your species acting for reasons that serve no individual strategic interest, of expending energy on something whose only function is," she paused, "is to make the space between one moment and the next bearable. We have no mechanism for this. We have productivity. We have rest. We do not have the thing that falls between them." "We call that music too," Jace said, "and hope, and just living, I guess, being alive and making the sound of being alive." A long silence. "I will remember this," Vale said, "specifically these words." "I hope it helps," he said. He left the bay. He walked down the corridor and found CO Jun waiting, as usual, with coffee, as usual, and fell into step beside her without needing to say anything because by now they had the particular communication of two people who had been working alongside each other through something difficult and had developed a shorthand. "Bay 7, she asked. "Yeah." "Same conversation as before, or new ground?" He thought about it. "New ground," he said. "I need to talk to Cho today if he's available. He's in the tactical suite. Get me in." She was already on her comm. The ship hummed. The drives thrummed through the floor, that constant low register that Jace had stopped consciously hearing and now only noticed in its absence. Somewhere in the ventilation, or maybe he was imagining it, maybe it was what he expected to hear because he'd been listening for it, Corvin was singing. Something old and slow, a song that had traveled from Ithessa through a mother's voice into a son's hands, and through the ventilation of a warship to the 12-frequency ears of an alien 3,000 years older than human spaceflight. He listened until the sound faded. He kept walking. The vision was still there, the room with stars, the table, the two figures, and it had the quality of something that hadn't resolved into good or bad yet because what it actually was neither. It was a beginning. The beginning of something that didn't have a name yet because nothing in either civilization's vocabulary had needed to describe it. He was working with the pieces. He had his whole life to figure out what they built.